This is Marcus Read, a podcast devoted to discovering, reading, and obsessing over books. I'm your host, Taylor Neary. Let's get into it. Season 4, Episode 2, Beach Read by Emily Henry. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Marcus Read. Hope you guys have been doing well since we last saw each other. You'll probably see as the season progresses that we are going to kind of tinker with how the video is going to work and all of that, just as we're working out the kinks. I am not a professional videographer by any means, so this is as much as an experiment for me as it probably is for y'all. So thanks for bearing with me, and let's go ahead and dive in. So, as I mentioned last time, I found this book at a local bookstore in Wilmington, North Carolina when I was visiting my mother-in-law over the holidays. And I think the only Emily Henry book I own right now is Book Lovers, and the title was enough to make me buy it. But normally I'm not a huge hardcover person. I actually really love reading paperbacks, and so I normally gravitate towards that if I'm buying a book. But this one was just so beautiful, and the sprayed edges have that whole beach vibe. I mean, it's just gorgeous. And, you know, I'm really glad that I actually picked it up because I was talking to my friend Kate, who you guys have virtually met on the podcast quite a few times, and who is my go-to book friend. And she loves Emily Henry, has read all of the books, and she was showing me she has a couple of the special edition ones, and she's kind of working on collecting them, and they were just so gorgeous when she showed me that it immediately made me want to get them myself. But also she was telling me how much she really loved Beach Read, and I'm really glad that I took her advice and went ahead and read it. So let's go ahead and dive in. Another feature is actually today, the day I'm recording, so it'll be few days later by the time we post this, is actually my birthday. And as part of one of my birthday presents from my family is I got this gorgeous reading journal, which normally I actually do bullet journaling, and I haven't actually ever done like a more formal reading journal, but I am so excited to use this one. And I mean, just like the vibes are so good. So I'm using that as my inspiration for each podcast episode, so you will definitely be seeing her regularly. So going back to Beach Read, the only two Emily Henry books I had read before this were Book Lovers and Happy Place. And we had a whole Book Lovers episode. As you guys know, I absolutely adore that book. And I mean, it's kind of outside of the type of romance that I typically read. Not gonna lie, I normally read trashy romance on my Kindle Unlimited app, and like no regrets about that. But if I'm going for something that's kind of like more lighthearted but not spicy, normally I will go for more of just like a general fiction. So I haven't really read a ton of romance that is kind of this like real plot development and character development versus just spice. And I don't know why I went into this, because I love Book Lovers and Happy Place, but I went in like kind of nervous about it and like not excited, which is just kind of weird. Normally I don't go into books with preconceived notions or anything like that. As you guys know, I hate reading blurbs or anything. So normally I kind of go in blind. And like, I had read the back of this. I had read the first chapter. Like, I was into it. I've read other books by Emily Henry, but for some reason, I was just really struggling to kind of motivate myself to read this. But ultimately, I'm so glad I did, because I absolutely adored it. And I'm still kind of like confused about my like general trepidation with it, because I just love how Emily Henry writes. She has such good banter, and even not just the banter, just like the conversations are so real and feel so natural that it really lends this relatable, natural quality to the characters, even if they're in situations that maybe are not super relatable to you. The way that the characters interact with each other and talk to each other feels so real and like something you've either witnessed or an actual conversation that you've had, that it really draws you in so quickly. I think that's one of the things that I really love about her writing style. I definitely noticed that in Book Lovers and Happy Place. And I think the banter between the two main characters, but then also each individual main character and kind of their like secondary characters that are related to them, whether it's family or friends or anything like that, was all so good and unique to each character relationship that it just keeps you going the whole time. Like, you really want to be into this. So that, I think, is probably one of my favorite things about Emily Henry. I think I'm just going to have to read all of her books now because I want to see all of the banter and all of these interactions with people. It really does draw you in and make you want to spend your time with these people. I mean, I've been thinking about that a lot starting the podcast this season. Obviously, it's 2025. There's a lot going on in the world, and my regular job that's not this requires me to really focus on the news and things like that. So I'm very much inundated with that. And someone was telling me the other day that they think about reading as their escape from reality. And I really connected with that because I really do feel like reading is my time to get away, even if I'm reading nonfiction. And that's kind of what I want this podcast to be for us as we're having this conversation, is it's our excuse to not talk about the news and not talk about everything that's going on right now, but to take a step back and maybe focus on our own mental health and maybe some more positive moments, whether it's in a book or it's with a conversation or, you know, an introduction to a new author or a fun thing that you read that made you smile, anything like that. And that's what I really want to focus on in the podcast. And I feel like Emily Henry and her books in general, but especially Beach Read, is really great for that. The two main characters are already struggling with their own personal journeys and issues and are kind of using this time in the story as their own escape from reality. And then we get to witness that and also witness them falling in love and kind of discovering themselves even more than they already have as they're both in their 30s. And I think that's really amazing. And I just love that idea of that escape from reality. It's not an avoidance or a burying your head in the sand or anything like that. It's taking care of yourself and kind of like building up your own like emotional strength so that you can then deal with all of the craziness that's happening in this world. So if you're looking for an escape, highly recommend Beach Read. So for those of you who haven't read it, first of all, go read it. But also I feel like not a huge spoiler because of like the kind of book that it is. It's not exactly, you know, like super surprises or anything. But our two main characters, January and Gus, January is a romance writer and Gus is a literary fiction writer. And they knew each other in college, but were like rivals. And it's been a while now. They've both published books. They're both successful. And both are kind of going through midlife crisis. Seems too extreme because they're not anywhere near close to middle age, but kind of like a quarter life crisis where they've both been very successful so far in their writing careers, but they're both experiencing this writer's block and they don't know if they have it in them to kind of like move forward and write the next book. So they're both struggling with that. And then also struggling with personal relationships as they're both kind of dealing with these traumatic events in their lives. And then also like dealing with all of these things that are happening in this town. Like we are, as kind of like a side plot, you're learning about this cult that used to be in this town. And like as they are learning about it, you're kind of experiencing that with them. And okay, so as always, of course, I read the author's note because y'all know how I feel about an author's note. And this one was really good. Emily Henry was talking about how she was experiencing her own writer's block. And this is kind of the story that emerged from that. And obviously I'm not a writer, but I can still relate to those moments where you're kind of struggling with your creativity or at a plateau and you're trying to figure out which direction you're going to go in and having self-doubt and all of that. And for her, it's writer's block as an author, and she portrays that in these two author characters. But I think one of the things that makes her so incredible as an author is that she makes that like specific writer's challenge relatable to everyone in a way that is not just allowing you to empathize with the characters, but also really understand what they're struggling with, even if you haven't been in that position. And it was just really lovely. 10 out of 10 would recommend. I mean, plus it's about authors and people who love books talking about books. And obviously those are some of my favorite things. I will say, for all of my trashy romance in general, one of my least favorite one of my least favorite tropes is miscommunication. My other ones are friends to lovers, and yeah, that's it. I just really hate the miscommunication trope. It is very frustrating to me and seems very unrealistic, and I just don't relate to that at all, and I find it very frustrating. And I will say that Beach Read almost got to that miscommunication moment. It didn't quite get there. It was just mixed signals, which I'm way more okay with. But there definitely was a point in the book where I was like, if she takes this a certain way, I'm out. And she didn't. I mean, and maybe other people enjoy that, like everyone can enjoy their own thing. But for those of you who don't enjoy the miscommunication trope, keep on to call it a cult, which clearly Freudian slip for how I feel about that trope. But for those of you who don't enjoy it, I will say it is not a miscommunication trope. So you don't have to worry about that as you're reading. It is very much more of like a mixed signals and kind of like a not willing to come forward with your feelings because you're afraid you're going to be rejected, but both of you are feeling that way. So kind of that typical rom-com thing. So I think like the romance and the relationship obviously is one of the things that makes her book so popular. But for this one specifically, honestly, I really loved the cult research. Like, I love learning about cults, true crime, all of that kind of stuff. I find like anthropology and psychology super interesting, and I love learning about those different situations. So the fact that they were doing research on this cult and like interviewing people and all this stuff was really fascinating to me. And while I loved the romance plotline, I really actually wanted there to be more like the culty plotline, or like somehow for that to come into it more. I guess that maybe this isn't the type of book I should read if I'm looking for the cult stuff, but it was definitely there. I mean, you can't really avoid the cult stuff when it's like they are definitely doing like cult things and like interviewing people about it. And I do think there was like definitely some heavier emotional trauma that was being dealt with by January and Gus in their personal lives, between January and her now past father and his mistress and her mom, and like those relationships and ability or lack thereof to kind of process those emotions. And then Gus is pretty recently divorced and definitely still grieving and like processing that relationship as well. And then you also have these survivors of this cult. The cult is now gone. Like, it's already reached its like apocalypse day situation. So the only people left are like survivors or people who got out. And obviously their stories are really harrowing and dark. But I do think that adds like a note of reality to it. Not every story is happy and, like super positive all the time. And Gus is really looking for these deep emotional like challenges that people go through and experience, and he's trying to understand that for his next book. And I appreciate that Henry doesn't shy away from that, even though this is a romance book, so that it feels more real into what the process would actually be if you're doing research into how to write a fiction book that's based in a cult. Like, he's not actually using these people, but he's trying to understand why someone would join a cult, why someone would join this type of cult, what led them to get out, things like that, so that he can more accurately create characters that feel more three-dimensional and real, which I find to be very interesting in general, but also really appreciate that in a writer. And I appreciate the level that Gus is willing to go to create these real characters. And it kind of makes me want to read Gus's fake book that he writes about the cult. Obviously, there was a lot of fakes in there, so definitely not happening. But it was just very interesting to have that kind of angle to it, which you don't always see, I don't think, in books. So something else that plot-wise that was happening is what I already mentioned between January and her mom and her deceased dad's mistress, Sonia, who lives in this town. Like, the whole start of the plot is that January's dad has died kind of unexpectedly, and his mistress shows up at the funeral and gives January the keys to this house that he owns. And so she's there to like clean it out, and she thinks she wants to sell it, but also like things have kind of crumbled in her life after his death and learning that he was having this like pretty drawn out affair. And so like her and her mom aren't really talking because her mom's not willing to talk about it. And she's always been this like, everyone has a chance for a happily ever after, but like now her worldview is kind of being darkened and she's kind of struggling with that. And, you know, like the mistress lives in this town where the house is that she's living in. And so like she runs into the mistress occasionally, and like her mom is not talking where she lives. And I was kind of expecting there to be like a big blow up or something. Like maybe I've been watching too much TV or something. But, you know, in some ways it felt really appropriate that things kind of just settled on their own. It was like Sonia was not a bad person and was trying to do the right thing. And January's mom was trying to do the right thing by not telling January about the affair, even though she found out about it. And there's just like, no one is 100% good or 100% bad. And so it just kind of like settles, like, you know, there's no like big resolution where all of a sudden everyone is happy and like best friends and they all forgive each other, whatever. It just kind of, they all move past it almost. And I feel like that's probably realistic for how a situation would actually be. But it did also seem kind of anticlimactic that it just kind of like fizzled away. I don't know. I mean, like an entire confrontation or something is my nightmare. And I would have just had like secondhand anxiety and embarrassment and like trauma from it. But at the same time, I was kind of expecting that. I don't know, it was like this weird mix where like the third act breakup was because of Gus's ex-wife coming back and there being like a conversation, and that's kind of where some of that miscommunication bit came in. But that was really it, and then it was kind of like resolved pretty quickly. I mean, love it that there wasn't like some super traumatic third act breakup. But it did seem like there were all these threads that were being laid that had the potential to be that and then didn't do it. And I mean, I think clearly that was a choice that Henry made as she was writing this. And I'm kind of fine with that. But also it was just surprising in general that she didn't choose to do that, because I think that is kind of the more stereotypical thing that would happen. But, you know, I'm kind of cool with it. I will say some of the other side characters were actually some of my favorite characters, specifically Pete. Obsessed with her. She's incredible. Like, she had so much depth for being a secondary character and like not that much page time, and I'm still like very into her and like very interested in her life story and would totally read a book about her. And I also really liked January's best friend, who was like very much encouraging her and supporting her in that way. And I think that was really fun. I will say, I think some of Gus's friends didn't get the build out that I wanted. Like, one of the earliest scenes is there's this like blowout party being thrown at Gus's house on the eve of his or anniversary of his divorce. And I just wanted a bit more into that, into like how that started and like the background with his friends. I think part of the reason why that wasn't really built out is because the friends didn't live where everyone else was. And 90% of the story you're getting from January's perspective. And so like when she's talking on the phone with her friend, you're getting that perspective, which you're not super getting from Gus in his perspective chapters. But I mean, I don't think it was missing necessarily. It was just something that like, if there were an extra 100 pages, first throw in more cults and then throw in a bit more build out there. But honestly, it was also fine. I will say I think that it would have been fun to have like something more dramatic having happened at the frat party that January and Gus were at. I mean, we find out that they danced and had this like super like sparks fly kiss, but like that was kind of it. And I wanted there to be like more drama. Clearly I was here for the drama, and that's kind of what I was in the mood for. And there was some, but I kept being like, are we going to amp it up more? Are we going to amp it up more? And then we didn't quite do that, which totally fine. Like probably better for everyone's emotional well-being that we're not dealing with that. But there were definitely moments where I was like, if someone else was writing this in a different situation, or this was a teen show on the CW or something, this would have happened for sure. But yeah, it was like, now thinking back on it, I'm kind of glad we didn't have to deal with that baggage, you know, and there was just like this little tease, but it wasn't a lot. So moral of the story is that I think Emily Henry is great. Like, no real notes. Would highly recommend this to all different types of people. This one does have a little spice. Some of it is closed door, some of it is not. But honestly, if you're reading anything else like in the, you know, like big popular books right now, it's nowhere near close as steamy as Fourth Wing or anything like that. Like, if Fourth Wing is your bar of like an average book, this is like negative spice. I mean, I think there are 2 or 3 scenes, maybe, like very minimal spice. So you definitely could recommend it for anyone. It'll also be really easy to skip them. They're pretty short. I think it would also be a fun book club book just to have a conversation about, like, thinking about writer's block in general, thinking about the different types of relationships that you're seeing in the book between friends and blood-related family and found family, and kind of like creating your own community and all of that. Plus, I think it'd be interesting to hear people's perspective on the cult aspect in a romance book. I do think that out of Emily Henry's books, Book Lovers is probably my favorite still. I mean, it's called Book Lovers, so like I feel like I gotta stick with that. But I really, really loved this one too, and I think I would probably reread it as well. I'm not a huge rereader of romance, but I think this is one that, like, if you're kind of in a rut or like in a bad mood and you need something to kind of pick you up, or just like a warm hug in a book, then this would be a great option. And, you know, like there is kind of like these dark moments, but overall is pretty light and fluffy and it's just enjoyable to read, and would really just be great, you know, like cozy up on your couch with a cup of tea on a cold day, or like reading at the beach, you know, like all great options. And this one would definitely fall into all of those reading categories. Of course, note for everyone else, if you have not been here for very long, we are large proponents of reading the author's note. mostly because in historical fiction, if you think about Lisa C. or Kate Quinn, they write really detailed author's notes that really go into their process and, like what is fact and what is fiction and that kind of thing. Obviously, that's not the case for this book, but I do think her author's note goes into how she kind of came to this point of writing this book and how it is different from some of her other books, but how true it was to that moment in her life. And for me, at least, getting that insight into the author always adds this new layer to a book that makes me love it even more, of just like understanding their reasoning for writing it and their perspective. And it's just something I really love. So we'll wrap up Beach Read for now. Next week, very exciting, we are going to be talking about Onyx Storm. I literally have an entire page in here of theories and notes. If you have any theories or things you want to talk about, questions that you have from Onyx Storm, make sure to comment on the video, or you can always email me or comment on our Instagram or anything like that. And very exciting. Will say right now, next week, you cannot watch or listen to the episode if you don't want spoilers. The whole episode is basically going to be spoiler filled. So just like note that now. So to wrap up here, let's talk about what I'm reading, listening, and watching right now. Of course, reading, while I have finished Onyx Storm, I am currently rereading Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, probably to reread Onyx Storm a second time. I love when a new book comes out, rereading the other books in the series so that you kind of pick up on things that maybe you didn't pick up the first time, but also it's super fresh when you dive back in. And Fourth Wing and Iron Flame are pretty fresh in general for me. I've read both of them twice, I think now, maybe 3 times. So I didn't actually start reading them before I started reading Onyx Storm. But now that I've read Onyx, I do want to go back and kind of see if there are things that I missed, or, like things that I learned in Onyx, I want to go look for in the prior books and look for those Easter eggs. So that's what I'm currently rereading. Listening to, I'm actually re-listening to a podcast I'd already listened to. And I think I've actually mentioned it here before because I did binge listen to it on a car trip. But it's called Scamanda. And it is about this woman who was going through all these cancer treatments and stuff, and raising all this money to help pay for her treatments, all of this stuff. She was basically an influencer for the fact that she had cancer, and the whole thing turned out to be a scam. And there is now a Hulu show based on it. And so I'm re-listening to the podcast before I watch the show. So haven't started watching the show, but the show that my husband and I are currently obsessed with is The Rookie. Normally, I'm not a Nathan Fillion fan. I think that's how you say his name. I don't know why. He's just normally not my favorite. However, he is so good in The Rookie. I love all of the character development. Yes, it's a cop show, but also the characters are so good. And I'm so into all of the different interpersonal relationships and interactions. And it's very good. And my husband, who doesn't normally like cop shows, is obsessed with it. So if that tells you anything, take it for what you will. Also, new episodes are still coming out, which is key. So we're going to leave it there for now. Next week, of course, we'll be back with Onyx Storm. So make sure to stay tuned. And I hope you guys have a fabulous week of reading. Until next time.
This has been Mark is Read. Thank you for listening. Please rate, review, and share the podcast, as that is how people find us. Email markasreadpod@gmail.com to suggest books, and subscribe to the newsletter at markasreadpod.substack.com. See you next time, and enjoy a week of reading.